Hey guys, Lady Lee here. In this video, I want to show you how I can my milk. This might be not a very common thing to do. I know that just until a few years ago, I didn't even know that it is possible to can milk. I just started keeping goats, and I remember that I was so excited to make cheese, and the milk started flowing, and I made a whole lot of cheese until I just got so tired that one day I was just thinking to myself, is there another way for me to preserve the milk for my goats? I did freeze some of the milk, and sometimes I still do it. Especially I freeze milk for soap making, but I really wanted to keep the room in the freezer for other things. So I wondered if there was a way for me to can milk. And I went and did some research and found out that on one hand, no modern research will tell you that it is safe to can milk. However, on the other hand, people have been doing this for generations. Now, I always side with grandma, so of course I felt comfortable to can my milk. It is up to you to go and do the research and decide if it is safe or not, and if you want to do it. There are a lot of comments on the blog post that I have on the blog, and I'll link to it below, from people that have been canning milk for years and never had any problems with it. So I decided to try, and I was really surprised at the result. First of all, the milk lasted for a month, and I wasn't sure how it was going to taste, but once I opened a jar and tried it, it tasted kind of like evaporated milk. Kind of did have, I would say, sweetness to it that I couldn't taste before. I thought it will taste worse, but actually, in my opinion, it tasted even better. You'll see when you do your research that some people will say that it's not recommended to drink canned milk, and mostly what I use my canned milk for is for making pancakes or French crepes or things like that, mostly for cooking. But I did try to drink it, and it actually tasted really good. So we'll talk a little bit more later about how you can use canned milk, but let me show you for now how I do it. And I'm going to go over really quickly on what we need. So obviously we need milk, and I'm going to can 4 quarts of milk here. We need jars. I prefer to use the quart jars, but you can do the same process with pint jars too. New lids. You can always reuse bins, but we always want to use new lids to make sure that our seal is at great condition and is not damaged or anything. We're going to need the jar lifters. We're going to need the magnetic lid lifter and the canning funnel. And of course, we're going to need a pressure canner. We're also going to need a small pot like this one. And what I'm going to do with this one is just boil the lids and the bins in it to sanitize them. All right, so that's all that we need, and let me show you how to can milk. It's pretty easy. All right, a few points here. First of all, I'm using raw goat milk. You can use any kind of milk. Store-bought milk is fine too. You'll do all kind of milks the same way. Then the other thing that I wanted to mention that I didn't mention before is that milk is a low acid food. If you go on the blog and you read the comments, you already see that some people can milk in a water bath. Milk is low acid, and like all low acid food, we use the pressure canner, so I felt more comfortable to use the pressure canner to can milk, so that's what I'm using. And I'm using Presto dial gauge pressure canner. The process is probably similar for the weighted gauge canner, but I never owned one, so I'm not exactly sure how it will be different as far as the process itself. If you use a weighted gauge canner and you can your milk, then please comment below and let us know if you do anything different. The first thing that I'm gonna do is sanitize the jars and the lids. Okay, so the lids and the rings are going to go into a pot of boiling water. I'm gonna reuse those rings. So I'm just putting them, I boiled this water before, but I'm just putting them in this small pot with some water, cover them with water, and then putting them on the stove top, and I'm turning it to high, and I'm gonna let the water come to a boil and leave the rings and the bins in the water to boil for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, I'm gonna turn the heat off, but I'm gonna leave the bins and the rings and the bins and the lids in the hot water. I don't need to remove them until I'm actually covering the jars. Now, as far as sanitizing the jars, you have a couple of options. You can heat a water bath canner or some big pot with water, bring the water to boil, and then put your jars in the boiling water and let them stay there for about 10 minutes or so. The other method is in the oven, which is what I prefer and which is what I'm gonna do. Basically, I heat my oven to 320 Fahrenheit, and I am going to put my jars, I put them on a baking sheet, and I'm going to put my jars in the oven for about 10 minutes, okay? Once I remove the jars from the oven, it's really important to remember not to touch the jars with our fingers in the area of the rim, so we don't introduce any bacteria. Also, another thing that I didn't mention before and is important to remember is that we don't want to put super cold milk into warm jars. So my milk was in the fridge and I took it out a few hours ago to let it come to about room temperature. It might be a little chillier than room temperature, but it's not super cold, okay? We don't want to put super cold milk in hot jars. Whenever we can, it's really important that we try to get the temperature to be somewhat similar so nothing breaks or explodes or whatever. So I'm going to put the jars in the oven to sanitize, and we'll go from there. While the jars are in the oven and the lids and the bins are in the boiling water, I went ahead and put about 4 quarts of water into my canner. I left the rack in there, inside the canner, and you have to follow the manufacturer instructions for whatever canner you use. I use a Presto canner. I could not find anything about canning milk in the manual or the recipe book, so I'm just going with what I usually do for most things. 4 quarts of water are somewhere around 1.5 inch to 2 inch of water. And I went ahead and turned the heat on and kind of started heating up this water. I don't want to bring them to a boil. Again, I want the temperature between the jars with the milk and between the water over in the pressure canner to be kind of similar. So just heated it up a little bit just to cut on some of the time later, but it's not boiling yet. All right, so I'm waiting for the jars to finish sanitizing in the oven, and then we'll fill them with the milk. Okay, so the jars are sanitized. I use the jar lifters to put them here on the board. Again, we don't want to touch the rim. And I forgot to tell you at the beginning, I always use a little damp paper towel to clean the rim before I cover with the lid. So you can get yourself a paper towel. It's not really written anywhere, but I feel more comfortable to know that the rim is completely clean before I put my jars into the canner. All right, so I'm just gonna take one jar at a time. I put the funnel on the clean jar, and I want to leave about 1 inch or about half an inch of headspace in each jar. So I'm missing a little bit here. All right, that's good. I'll just fill the next one. And if I'm missing a little bit of milk, I will just add some from what I left in the fridge for my morning coffee. All right, about an inch, half an inch to an inch of headspace. That's what we want to leave. All right. So I'm missing just a little bit here. So I'm gonna get just a tiny bit of milk from the fridge. I always leave some milk for my coffee. And this is cold milk, but most of the milk here is at room temperature, so it will be okay. All right, once I'm done with filling the jars, I take my little paper towel and I clean the rim of all of the jars. Again, I make sure not to touch the rim with my fingers. And then I grab the magnetic lifter and I just lift one lid at a time. We don't want to touch the bottom of the lid with our fingers, but we can touch the top. So I'm just centering it. On the jars. Just like this. And then I take the band and I want to close each jar finger tight, which means not too tight. Last one. All right, now I'm going to take each jar and I'm going to put it on the rack inside the canner. All right, and make sure they don't touch each other. And I'm going to turn the heat to high and close the canner. Oh, where am I? canner, and I do not put the weight on the canner yet. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna watch the vent, and at some point the vent is gonna start to exhaust steam. I wanna let the canner steam for 10 minutes, okay? So once steam starts to come out of here, I'm going of this, hope you can see it, this little vent. Once the steam starts coming out, I'm going to let the canner steam for 10 minutes. I'm going to set my timer and let it steam for 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, I'm going to put the weight. So I'm going to wait for that, and then I'll show you whenever steam starts to come. So this is probably going to take a few minutes. Sometimes, depending on the temperature of the water, it can take, you know, I warmed the water a little bit before to cut on the time a little bit, but it's probably going to take at least 10 minutes or so until it starts steaming. So I'll wait and then I'll be back. Alright, you guys, do you see the steam? I don't know if you can see the steam. I don't know if you can see the steam. Don't do this at home. But the canner is steaming. Steam is coming out of the vent here. And I have 2 more minutes to go, okay? Again, I'm letting it steam for 10 minutes. So I got 2.5 more minutes to go, and what I will do when the time is up is I'll put my weight on the vent, and then I'll start watching my gauge, my dial. And when it comes to 11 psi, I am going to turn the heat off. I'm not gonna let the canner process the milk on 11 psi for any amount of time. I'm just watching for the dial to reach 11 psi, and then I'm turning off the heat and letting the canner cool slowly. So I'm gonna wait a couple more minutes, and then I'll put the weight on, and I'll be back. Alright, just a few more seconds and we'll put the weight on. Alright, so I'm putting the weight on the vent, and now I'm going to watch my dial. It might take a couple of minutes, a few minutes to build pressure inside the canner. I don't know if you can see it, but it starts, it's already started rising. So, what are we going to do after it reaches 11 psi? Now, 11 psi is because I live in altitude lower than 1,000. If you live in higher elevations, you'll have to change the pressure. I don't remember the whole table. Again, it's on the blog in the post, and I will link to the post below, so you can go and look at the adjustment table and see what pressure do you need to adjust to. I remember if you live between 4,000 to 6,000, somebody just asked me the other day, 4,000 to 600 feet, you'll have to go up to 13 psi on a dial gauge canner and 15 on a weighted gauge canner. So the table is in the post. But once it reaches 11 psi, I'm going to turn the heat off, and I'm not going to touch the canner. I'm just going to let it go. It is evening, so I'm going to go do my chores, maybe weed the garden a little bit. I will let the canner just slowly cool down. It might take a couple of hours for it to cool down, and that's fine. I'll be back later at night to check it, and I only open the canner if the dial shows 0 pressure, and when I lift the weight, there's no steam coming out. Okay, that's very important. You don't want to burn yourself or anything like that. So that's what we're going to do. You also want to let the jars cool gradually and slowly so nothing breaks or explodes or anything like that. So we're almost at 11 psi. Just a couple more moments. All right. right, almost there. All right, that's good. So I'm just gonna close the heat, turn the heat off, and that's it. I'm gonna go do my chores, and I will see you here later tonight. All right, guys, it's been I don't think 2 hours, but maybe between 1 and 2 hours, and the dial shows me 0 pressure. I can actually hear a couple of jars already sealing, like that pop sound in there. So I think it's ready. I'm ready to remove or open the canner. So taking the weight off, just making sure that no steam is coming out, and then I will slowly open the canner. Now again, we talked before about changing temperatures when we can stuff, and we really want to make sure that we gradually change the temperature. So I am going to let the jars sit just like that in the open canner, but still in the hot water, for maybe 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes before I use the jar lifters and remove them. So be back. Okay, it has been about 10 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the jars from the canner and set them right here on the counter. All right, I think pretty much all of them already sealed, and they look great. All right, and now I'm going to leave them to cool completely, probably overnight. In the morning, I'm just going to press on the center of each jar to make sure that it's sealed. If there is no movement in the center of the lid, then that means that the lid is sealed, the jar is sealed, and they're ready for storage. So I'm going to just leave them overnight. I'm not going to disturb them. Then in the morning, I'll be ready to just undo the bins and wipe the jars, and I will store them. If you have a pantry, you can store them in a pantry. I don't have a pantry, so just a kitchen cabinet, or I have shelves in the other room that have all my canned goods on them. And that's it. That's how you can milk. Now, a couple of things. You might notice that over time, the cream separates from the milk, and that's completely fine. And then the second thing is, you might notice that your milk gets a little bit of a yellowish color. That's fine too, completely normal. How I use them, first of all, I try to use all my canned goods within a year of canning them. So I've never left milk for more than a year. And once I open the jar, I store it in the fridge, okay? Again, I will use it mostly for cooking, in recipes, if I need it for cakes, to make oatmeal, pancakes, French crepes, this kind of stuff. But it is possible, I think, to drink it too. It's up to you, whatever you feel comfortable. That's it. I hope that you learned something new today, and you now know that you can can your milk. And I want to ask you to please subscribe and like the video, so YouTube will help me show it to more people. And I will see you again in the next video. Bye.